Hey everybody, it's your Las Vegas poker coach. Glad to be back with you. Would really appreciate if you click on the like or subscribe button, whatever player you're listening on. Really helps the channel grow. Thank you for that. So, what makes the all-time best poker player? You know, I recently had an episode on masks at the poker table because it involved Helmuth and Haxton. Two players who are very capable, very much a part of poker history, a positive part of poker history. And it got me thinking about what criteria or what is the framework you would put down to say who is the all-time best poker player. And I think that's a really complex question because there's so many criteria, so many things that you can consider. So what I want to do here is I want to have a two-part series where I'm going to look at starting a conversation around what that criteria should be. I'm going to give what I think the criteria should be. And you're welcome to agree with it or disagree with it. You're welcome to add to it. Would love to hear from you. But, you know, let's at least start thinking about what does it mean to be the all-time best poker player? I just want to talk about the criteria in this episode. And in the second part, I'll start giving you some names to think about who I think, you know, can make a case for the all-time best poker player. But again, you know, that's just my criteria. My criteria doesn't have to be yours. And I'm not saying that I'm right or wrong. But I'm just starting a conversation here. And, you know, you can go ahead and add to it, or you can disagree with me, or you can agree with me. You can also say that maybe the criteria changes over time. The criteria you would have applied before online poker came along could be different than what you apply now. Would you apply different criteria for players before the moneymaker effect and after? Right? There's a lot of different ways to look at it though, right? So I know there's going to be a lot of debate. I know there's going to be a lot of different thoughts, and that's okay. And, you know, it's just part of the challenge of why it's so hard to name a single player. Is it even possible to pick one? Maybe it's not even possible to pick one. Maybe you have to have like a Mount Rushmore where you have multiple players, right? Gender also comes into play. Do you break it up by gender or not? Do you break it up by those eras of poker that I mentioned before? You could be penalizing some people simply because online poker was not available during their time, during their era. What about including things like, are they a good ambassador of poker? Should the greatest player out there also be a good ambassador of poker? Maybe, maybe not, right? On the one hand, they should be good to the public because the public supplies the prize pools for most tournaments, right? I mean, poker's unique that way. Poker's a professional sport where the athletes provide the prize pool, right? Casinos very rarely contribute to a prize pool. So maybe they should be good ambassadors. On the other hand, looking at other professional sports, most top people in other professional sports, guess what? They're not good people. You get to the top of a sport by being an obsessive narcissist, right? That's how you become a great player, by spending 10 hours a day by yourself doing the same thing over and over again. That's usually not a good person, right? So should we demand that of the top poker players? Maybe, maybe not. What about things like writing books or writing blogs or social followings? Do they have to have that to be the greatest poker player of all time? I don't know. It's a good question, right? It's fun to think about. I can think of a lot of really good players that aren't necessarily, you know, streamers or writers. You know, some of my favorite players are the Mizrahi brothers. You know, they've won the Poker Players Championship at the World Series, which is arguably one of the toughest trophies to win. But are they streamers with strong social followings and writing books? No. Does that disqualify them from being the greatest players? Maybe, maybe not. Also, how much weight do you give to longevity? Do you have to be a long-time poker player to be the greatest? Some poker players maybe died early or they retired early. Think about Fedor Holtz. I love Fedor Holtz. I think he's done some amazing things. But, he's basically semi-retired now. He declared his retirement in his prime. Now, I know he's played a lot since then and all that. But do we know how great he could have been? Maybe, maybe not. Right? Or what about somebody like, one of my favorite streamers of all time, Customer Service Carver? He also kind of, went out on top a little bit. And I know he's looking to come back and stuff like that. But is he the greatest? He's arguably taught more people to play poker than anybody else, and he has a bracelet. So, what criteria would you apply to him? But, he was around for a while, of course. But, does he have a longevity out there needed for that? And then what about bracelets in general? I mentioned Carver has a bracelet. Does the greatest of all time need to have a bracelet? Maybe. Some people would say that it's easier, quote unquote, to win a bracelet now because some of the events have such soft fields. There's also more bracelet events than there's ever been. Do you count online bracelets? What about circuit rings? There are some people out there with a lot of circuit rings. Do you count them? Also, there's thoughts about cash game versus tourney players. There are a lot of people out there who are longtime cash players that you don't know about. They are working day in, day out professionals that make money at cash games, have very little to no interest in the tournament, but they still win. They still win at poker. They're still professional poker players. Very hard to make a case for them to be an all-time great. You could argue that if you're decent at cash games, you should also have a pretty good tournament record because, there are some similarities in the bigger field, deep stack events, right? A good solid professional cash player should be able to do well in a deep stack, large field event. With a slow structure, of course, I'm assuming. A good cash player should have some main event cashes, right? The main event usually lines up well for a cash game player to be able to at least cash in, if not run deep in it. So how do you weigh that? There might be players out there that have that maybe only play a handful of tournaments a year, but they're still day in, day out professionals. So these are the types of things that I would like to think about and like to kind of add to the conversation. Would love to hear from you if I missed any criteria. Send me a message on Twitter. I'm at LVPokerCoach, all one word. Or you can also email me, coach@lvpokercoach.com. I want to know what you would add to the conversation. What is the criteria that you're looking for? And send me some names if it's possible. Because, it's also possible that no players out there currently meet the criteria, right? So now let's talk about my criteria. This is the criteria that I would apply to finding the all-time best poker player. So to be clear about this, I'm looking for the best all-around player. So my criteria might be a little bit more stringent than what other people would apply, because some people out there that would apply criteria don't care about mixed games. They only know about no limit hold'ems. That's the only criteria they want to apply, and that's okay, right? But mine might be a little bit more stringent because I think there really only should be one greatest of all time. So this is the criteria that I'm putting forward. First of all, I'm gender neutral. I think that it's possible to find a single all-around best player. I don't think we need to break it out by male, female. I think that women have an equal footing in poker. I think we should celebrate the accomplishments that women have made in poker. I used to love being able to go to the Commerce and seeing Barbara Enright play there at the Commerce. She was a day in, day out cash player there, for those of you that don't know. I think she deserves a lot of credit as a pioneer for women in poker. And we should continue to celebrate that. But I do think that, poker is a level field where we can say that the all-time best player designation is gender neutral. I think that the best all-around player should also have an online and a live winning record. It really, really pains me to say that. It pains me to say that because I realize that I'm eliminating a lot of the players from many, many eras prior to online poker. Particularly the one I feel the worst about saying that is Doyle Brunson, because I'm basically saying Doyle Brunson can't be the best all-around player, and that stinks. That guy has, obviously written one of the best books out there, has taught a lot of people to play, was a real gentleman in poker. So really hard to add him to an exclusion list there. But we have to accept that online poker is obviously here to stay. It's not going to go anywhere. So yeah, I do think that the best all-around player should have an on-live and live winning record. Coming back to the previous podcast I had made about masks, that also eliminates Phil Hellmuth because he's still young enough where he could change this. But Phil Hellmuth does not have a online record to speak of, right? So that also eliminates players like him. I also think about somebody like Eric Seidel. Obviously a long-time player, tons of longevity, tons of cash, tons of tournament wins. Virtually very little, online presence there. My next place of criteria is that they do have to have won at least one bracelet. I don't think that bans a lot of people, a lot of the greats that you would think about now. Because I'm really having a hard time thinking about a really solid player that hasn't won a bracelet. And obviously it can change very quickly, right? I mean, every summer there's 50 plus, 60 plus bracelets up for grabs. So, I'm kind of putting that criteria in there more just to kind of prevent some newer player to the game or somebody who just kind of storms on the scene wanting to be declared the all-time best if they don't have a bracelet, right? So I think that's one of those kind of like your entry fee to even be considered in the conversation. And again, I don't think that excludes a lot of players, but they got to have to win at least one bracelet. Now, the challenge there is, and it kind of segues into my last criteria, is does the bracelet need to be in a non-Texas Hold'em event or a no limit Hold'em event? That becomes a really interesting question because there's plenty of players who have only won a no limit Hold'em bracelet, right? Plenty of players that just have one bracelet and it was in a big field, no limit Hold'em event. Does that count? Of course it counts. It's still a bracelet, but maybe it kind of takes them down a couple of points. You could also say, well, maybe they have to have a bracelet in no limit Hold'em. But then guess what? You just eliminated Phil Ivey because Phil Ivey has 0 no limit Hold'em bracelets. All his bracelets came in mixed games, right? So how do you weigh that? Does the type of bracelet kind of tarnish your ability to be named the all around best player? What if you won it online? I mean, there's a couple people now who only have online bracelets, right? Okay, so my final criteria here is that they also have to have a record in mixed games. You can't be the best all-around poker player because remember, I said from the beginning, I said all-around best poker player, not the all-around best no-limit player. You have to have a decent record in mixed games. You can't just be a no-limit Hold'em specialist. Do they have to have a bracelet in mixed games? Or at least in a no-limit Hold'em game? Because you can have a bracelet just in Omaha or just in Stud or whatever. I don't know about that. That's tough for me to say on that. I think that most of the talented mixed games players are able to get a bracelet. The challenge is that there's just not as many events. I mean, how many 7-card Stud bracelet events are there every year? maybe 2. I mean, it's just not a popular bracelet event, and which means that the fields are also harder, right? Because it attracts the very best players. When you have a $10,000 7-card stud championship on the WSOP schedule, all the best players in the world are going to play that game, right? So maybe you add more weight to those bracelets because you know that it's the world's top field. Trust me, there's very few soft spots buying into a $10,000 7-card event, right? So how do you kind of measure those abilities and those records and those bracelets? Kind of hard to say, right? But that's it. Those are the 4 general criteria that I'm putting out there. I'm gender neutral, has to have an online and live winning record, have to have won at least 1 bracelet. You know, that's the main the minimum entry fee. And you have to have a record in mixed games. You can't just be a no limit hold'em specialist. So what do you guys think? Would love to hear from you. Send me a comment or a DM on Twitter. I'm at LV Poker Coach, all one word. Or send me an email, coach@lvpokercoach.com. Thanks a lot, and I'll catch you next time. Hey, let's keep the conversation going. You can reach me on all socials at LV Poker Coach, all one word, on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.